Hi everyone and welcome to Shah Lusso, and yes, today is part 2 of my conversation with Engineer Wannabe. Now if you haven't seen part 1, you'll find a link to it in the description below, as well as a box to my left with a link to that video as well, where we talk about in general what makes Grand Seiko so special. Now today in part 2, we're going to be continuing talking about Grand Seiko. We're going to talk about Engineer Wannabe's theme of Grand Seiko, specifically to have white dials. I'm going to ask him what's best, 9F, Hi-Beat, or the Spring Drive. I'm going to get some recommendations from him on what Grand Seikos I should consider from my collection, as well as finding out what Grand Seiko reference numbers actually mean, what the different letters mean, and how to understand them. As always, if you want to jump to any part of this video, you'll find timestamps in the description as well. But let's get right into part 2 of my conversation with Engineer Wannabe. And now, how did you center on this theme of having that white dial trio that you have? How did you sort of come to that? And did it start with the two that you already had, or did you cycle through a few white dials before you managed to have all three? How did it how did that come about?
First, I wanted the base basically was that I wanted a spring drive, a high beat movement, and 9F quartz. I didn't think of making it all white dialed at first. And I personally really love white dials. White dials are close to my heart, and which is why the snowflake, when I first saw the snowflake, it hit close to home, and it's a beautiful white dial. So when I did get the snowflake, and I made a video about it, but it didn't work for me at the time. Looking back at that video, it's kind of really cringy now. So I had the snowflake. It didn't work for me, and I sold it. And I really missed having that snowflake dial, which is why I was looking for a significant amount of time for the SBGJ201. That's the Hi-Beat GMT. I think I have don't have it out right now, but the Hi-Beat GMT with the Mount Iwate dial. So it's it radiates from the inside. It's a sun ray dial, but it's really deep, and it looks like it's hard to describe, but it looks like someone had a ball of powder and dropped it, and you can see, like, if it was like a water balloon or something, it just radiates out. And it's really beautiful. So once I finally got my hands on that, I already had the SBGY003, and I was thinking, okay, so now I have the Spring Drive and I have the Hi-Beat. I need a 9F, and I got the SBGP015, and I thought, you know what, this should be all white dialed. I started looking for the SBGX259, which is the white dialed one I'm wearing right now. And yeah, it took a while again to find. For some reason, it seems like Grand Seikos come out in waves. I'll visit a few ADs, and suddenly they'll have like this two-tone, beautiful two-tone Grand Seiko, and another AD will have that same Grand Seiko, and then they'll be gone, and then suddenly they'll have like this black dialed, really cool charcoal dial Grand Seiko. Both of them will have it, and then they'll be gone. And they seem to come out in like weird waves. I don't know how the distribution works, but yeah. So my AD finally got a white dial 9F quartz, and I jumped on it as soon as I saw it. So that's kind of how the white dial theme came about.
Between the three sort of options, or the three pillars of Grand Seiko movements, between 9F quartz, Spring Drive, and Hi-Beat, if you had to pick one, which would you pick and why?
Oh, that's easy. Spring Drive all day. Because again, if 9F is over-engineered, if the Hi-Beat 9S was over-engineered, Spring Drive is just way out there. It was crazy over-engineered. Like it took the engineer, the chief engineer who designed it, took him 28 years to even develop that, and he didn't even see it come out on a production model watch because he died before it even came out. And it's a fascinating movement. I don't know if I'm sure you've looked into that. You've had the Spring Drive chronograph, so
Yeah. It's funny because now that it's out, it surprises me that others haven't tried to replicate. I mean, I think the closest thing, Piaget came out with like some mad expensive thing that was similar-ish principle, but it surprises me that the Swiss haven't really tried to replicate it, because before getting into watches, I was very into cars, and I stopped being into cars around sort of, I guess, 2015-ish, when hybridization was still coming around. So then going into watches a few years later, to me, it seems like the logical step. It's a hybrid, essentially. You get the best of both worlds. And like, I still follow Formula One, where they use the hybrid technology to fill in boosts and turbo lag. Like, they use them to make up for each other's shortcomings. In the same way, something like a spring drive, you never need a battery, which is a shortcoming, I guess you could say, of quartz, but you get the precision of a quartz. It baffles me that no one else has really done a serious effort to try and replicate that, which to me, it just shows probably how Herculean the task to make it work was to begin with. Like, that's one of the things that, to me, Grand Seiko has a lot of appeal. It's why I want to think, maybe should I get a Grand Seiko, is having that really like pinnacle of technology in what is still like this antiquated world of watches that we live in. Like, at the end of the day, even the craziest spring drive will still lose out to an iPhone, but it's like, I don't care.
Yes, it does. And it's I guess if you really think about it, I've kind of flip-flopped on this a bit. I've been thinking, would you call this, a quartz watch? It has kind of people say it has no soul, right? The Swiss watch guys will say the Spring Drive has no soul. It's kind of a dead thing. It's so mechanical. It's so perfect that it just seems off, kind of like an Android or something. But I think a lot of people mention the quote by, I'm not sure if it was Philippe Dufour or someone, but the fact that the escapement is the heartbeat of the mechanical watch, and the Grand Seiko Spring Drive movements don't have an escapement or a traditional escapement like that. There's no tick 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 tick. It's more of a buzz, not even a buzz, but it's more steady, and it's basically an electromagnetic brake that helps release the spring's power versus a pallet fork that controls the release of the spring's energy for the timekeeping. So I think that's, I guess, one excuse that people use for not really enjoying Grand Seiko spring drives. A lot of people still don't like spring drive. They call it a quartz movement, which I don't fault them for. It is kind of a quartz movement. It's kind of like a quartz watch in a mechanical watch, and the quartz watch is telling the mechanical watch to release the time, basically, or to tell the time. So if you really get down to it, maybe it is a quartz watch, but it's so amazingly over-engineered that you can't not appreciate it. Which is why I would always, if I had to only keep one, I don't always keep the spring drive. And it doesn't hurt that it's so accurate. Like they rate it for plus or minus 15 seconds a month, but the ones I've had have been maybe +2, -1. I've had a few. They're always within 5 seconds a month, the ones I've had. So really insane stuff.
That's just crazy. Like, the closest I've got, my Omega, which is cost clarified, I think does a bit better than that. It does about 3 seconds a day, thereabouts.
Yeah.
This does about 7 or 8 seconds a day. But probably I should get this serviced. Like, I got this pre-owned, so probably at some point I should get it serviced. I know you can probably get it regulated to be a bit more accurate. But just the notion of that level of accuracy over amount of time, and still has so many mechanical parts to it. I think that's, like, for me, I personally don't write off as a quartz, and I even, just like you, I can appreciate over-engineered quartz, stuff like what you see with Grand Seiko, stuff like what you see with the FP Journe Elegante, where it has like that sleep function, and it's still, it still has, in my view, if it can overcompensate on the geekiness and still be mechanical-ish charm, it doesn't cross over into the fully digital world of like iPhones or smartwatches, then I can still appreciate it if it compensates with that level of over engineering. But the Spring Drive, yeah, I think for me at least, I find it as like a best of both worlds type of solution. Like I look at it in the same way I look at it with F1 cars. It's helping the old thing work with the newer thing, but it's not like, I wouldn't look at hybrid supercars or hybrid F1 cars in the same way I would look at a Tesla. For me, a Tesla is fully heartless. But if it's being that crutch for the old technology to soldier on longer, then I'm all for it.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, what Grand Seikos have you been looking at?
So the one that I've been focused on the most, let me get like I said, I'm terrible with reference numbers, and Grand Seiko doesn't make it easy by not really making their official names stick very much. Like I've noticed everyone refers to Grand Seikos either by a specific nickname if it's got one, or it's the reference number. The one I sort of looked at the most is the SBGJ203, the GMT, with the Hi-Beat one.
Black and white dial.
Yeah, the black dial. And then also I like the SBGJ237, the one with the blue and white bezel. Those are the two that most caught me. I want to get a GMT, so it's like, well, I might as well see if I can hit two birds with one stone. Those are the two that have appealed to me the most, but also I wanted to see, like speaking to you, which other ones you would recommend, and also what you think of those two.
Yeah. So the 237, if I'm not mistaken, is the one with the loom bezel, right? That one's really cool. You don't mind the largeness of the 237? I think that's a 44 no?
I have to try it on. What surprised me when I tried out the GMT Chrono was that despite having big dimensions on paper, it fit a lot smaller than I expected. I mean, that one was, I think, 45 and it was like 16, 17 mm thick even. So it was pretty chunky on paper, but it felt a bit smaller than that. And my point of reference for a chunky watch before that was my Tudor Black Bay Chrono, which is 41 by 16. And that one of the reasons why I sold it was too thick. But that felt thick. Something about that Grand Seiko, it seemed to sort of hide away on the wrist. I don't know if it's how the links are designed, if it's maybe just the way it's finished. So I'm open to the one with the loom bezel. Base is trying it on and hoping that it actually fits me well. But like I have faith somehow that maybe it can sort of hide its size away on the wrist. But yeah, it's pending trying it on. I know that in that style of GMT they also do, I think, a 40 millimeter one. I forget what the reference is, but it's in just the black bezel. Because also I do like that blue and white combination for the GMT bezel. Because it's not something it's not the typical Pepsi, Batman, Coke that you see everyone else try and do.
Yeah, those 40 millimeter ones are really cool because I think the one you mentioned is a Hi-Beat, the 237.
Yeah.
40 millimeter one is a Spring Drive, and they wear really well. They're actually kind of really heavy. I tried them on 2 days ago. I was at my AD 2 days ago, and I tried them on. They're really heavy. They're really dense in a good way. Yeah. But yeah, those were really well. And I guess one of the ways that Grand Seiko makes watches wear a lot thinner than they do is they cut in. Got some bad lighting here, but they cut inwards the cases. A lot of them, even though it might be 15, 16 millimeters, they wear like 12, 13 millimeters a lot of the time. They sometimes mess it up. Like I think the Skyflake, I really want to like the Skyflake, but the Skyflake, the SBGA407, the blue snowflake, it has a slab side, which is really strange for Grand Seiko to do. When they have a really nice case, with the SBGM221, they have a beautifully rounded case, and that will kind of make, even though the SBGM221 was 14 millimeters thick, it wore like a dress watch. This was a GMT cream dial. I know I'm rattling off reference numbers.
So do the reference numbers have any sense to them, or are they just...
The reason why I use reference numbers over the nicknames that they come up, or the community comes up with, is because the reference numbers are so full of information. At least the first four. Every letter except for the S. The S is always there, I've found. And then you have B, which is their main line, and then you have G is usually there. Uh, and then the last one is the most important one. So H will be for high beat time only. J will be for high beat GMT. X will be the 9F quartz, the smaller models. SBGV will be a 9F quartz bigger model. P will be their modern day 9F quartz, so SBGP, with their jumping hour hand. So it's not a GMT, but it looks like it operates like a GMT. And so like all these letters, they kind of give you a lot of information. And if you kind of memorize the J, H, A is Spring Drive, by the way. Their other chronograph models, they have the C. Recently, to my knowledge, they have the SL model. So now they start SLGH. And these are the ultra high end. Okay. So the SLGH003, the SLGH001. Then there's the SLGA, which is a Spring Drive. So you still have the H and A, H for high beat, A for Spring Drive, things at the end, but now it's SL.
So for the most part, probably the most indicative across most models would be that fourth letter to give you an idea of where it's at, and then the numbers, how do those play in?
I'm pretty sure the numbers are arbitrary. Like, oh, what's the next number? It's usually an odd number, I found. They have a list of numbers. You're like, okay, 221, 223, 225, 227.
That's just sequential. Okay. All right. Well, that at least gives me more context. I mean, like, I knew obviously they aren't completely random, but for me, I've noticed, like I said, that everyone always refers to Grand Seikos either by a certain nickname if it has it, but for the ones that don't have a specific nickname, it's all just reference numbers. And I marvel at how people remember them all, because like for me especially, they all seem so similar. But then I guess it's the same thing. Like I've somewhat grasped the Rolex ones. The Omega ones are a fucking nightmare. The Tag Heuer ones, I nearly deciphered them, but then they just started breaking patterns. So I was like, great, back to the drawing board. It's always fun understanding what the logic is at the end, because then you're like, oh, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. I think Oris has I'm sure Oris and Omega use similar coding methods, but they're just so egregiously long that you can't ever have a hope of memorizing it unless if you really obsess over it.
This is Omega, at least in the 90s, had seriously half the number of digits in the reference numbers. Like the early C Masters, I think like 6 digits. I think on mine, that one is, I think, 16 digits, something like that. 16 or 18 digits, and it's like, wow. it's crazy. It's crazy. I don't know what they do with so many, but also Omega has so many different SKUs and variations. It's like, I guess they had to amplify it at some point. So there you have it. A lot more information about Grand Seiko, as well as for me, quite a few different options to think about for my own collection. I'd like to thank Engineer Wannabe again for participating in this conversation, for taking the time to not only record enough content for 1, 2, and possibly a 3rd video as well, which will probably be coming out in the new year. So make sure you keep an eye out for that. Make sure you check out his Instagram as well as his YouTube page. You'll find links to those in the description. But with that being said, I'd love to know what you guys' thoughts are on Grand Seiko. What would you pick between Quartz, Spring Drive, and Hi-Beat, and why? And what Grand Seiko do you think I should be considering for my collection based on what you've already seen of what I already own, and hopefully I've gotten a bit of an idea of the sort of watches I like. I'd love to know your thoughts in the comments below. And of course, if you like this video, make sure you like it and share it. If you want to see more pictures of the infographics featured throughout this video, as well as all my other ones, make sure you follow me on Instagram at Shah Lusso. And of course, if you want to keep seeing new watch videos, make sure you follow the channel and hit that notification button as well so you know when the next video comes out. In any case, thanks for watching this video, and we'll catch you on the next one.